Asiatic black bears are strong, majestic creatures, but so gentle in spirit. They're playful and humorous, and solitary in nature. Found in mountainous regions such as China, Vietnam and Laos, they're also known as moon bears because of this large lemony crescent-shaped moon on their chests. Sadly, these beautiful creatures are highly endangered and suffer a dire fate at the hands of humans. Across Asia, an estimated 14,000 moon bears are being held in captivity on farms and milked for their bile because it's believed to be a health tonic in the practice of traditional Asian medicine. Kept in cages like this, they're starved and dehydrated. They're drugged, restrained, and have their abdomens jabbed with unsterilised 4-inch needles until their gallbladders are punctured to release their bile. Others are milked through open, infected abdominal wounds or rusty catheters. And they're pumped full of antibiotics and other drugs just to keep them alive. Most of them develop massive infections, multiple diseases, and malignant tumours that ultimately kill them. They're often suffering from wounds to their snouts. Their teeth are worn away or are shattered from biting at the cage bars, and their feet are cracked and rotting, having never felt the earth beneath them. Many have paws or even whole limbs missing from having been trapped in the wild, using heavy, spring-loaded steel traps that crush and shatter their bones. The worst part about this appalling trade, this disgusting industry, is that bear bile is completely unnecessary. There are over 54 different herbal alternatives and man-made synthetics which take its place. No one is going to die for the lack of bear bile. The bears we rescue from farms are sick and suffer from a litany of ailments. Over 35% have succumbed to liver tumours, and in some cases they're weighing over 7 kilograms in weight. Our sanctuaries in China and Vietnam give the bears that do make it a chance at living their lives free from fear, pain and suffering. They've lost, and in many cases never had, their natural survival skills, so they can never be reintroduced to the wild. But at least they're able to live out their lives in the safety and security of our enclosures. But we still have a long, long way to go, and Animals Asia will never give up until the very last bear farm is closed and as many bears as possible in China and Vietnam wake up each morning with the sun on their backs and without fear in their hearts.
Greetings, and thank you for visiting us today and participating in this very special webinar. I think you can see from the short film that preceded our guest's presentation that what we're talking about today is difficult and yet very hopeful work that's being done on behalf of these incredible individuals called moon bears. NEAVS is really honored to have with us today an individual who heads up an organization that is, in my opinion and the opinion of many others, the single most effective voice right now in the world to end the horrific practice of bear bile farming for the use of bear bile for medicinal purposes. She is the recipient of a 2017 Animal Hero Award, and that's not an overstatement in any sense of the word. In fact, when I told many of my esteemed colleagues who was coming to NEAVS, they said, "Oh, please give Jill my love. She's one of my most favorite people." And NEAVS feels exactly the same about her. Why would the New England Anti-Vivisection Society support her work, Animal Asia's work, for so many years? Because essentially what we're looking at here is what we call an Eastern form of vivisection. It is quite literally the cutting up of a living animal for the sake of some medicinal purpose, a purpose that's wholly unnecessary. Jill has traveled a long distance. I'm surprised she's still standing. She's come in from China last night. She goes back and forth between China and Vietnam, which are sanctuary homes to some 600 bears that have been rescued and brought to really peace and sanctuary through their good work. The staff is about 300 people in countries from Australia, New Zealand, Italy, Germany, the UK, and the USA. So it's a big team under her leadership that's getting this done. I always like to say of our guest that she is gifted with that rare combo of being a true visionary who does get involved and is involved in all major decisions, and someone who's simply not afraid to roll up her sleeves, work hard, and get the job done. She founded Animals Asia in 1998, and that was about 5 years after a chance encounter with a caged bear on a Bile farm in southern China, who changed her life forever. One of those first bears who she met actually reached out to Jill through the crushed cage bars, and Jill took that soft paw in her own hand, and that momentary touch changed her life and the life of, at this point, some 600 bears and still counting. That was about 25 years ago, and as they say, the rest is making history. So Jill, I want to welcome you. Thank you for being awake. Since it is midnight in your internal clock. And I think before you start your formal presentation, because you really are a legend, and I think people would like to know just a tiny bit about you, and maybe you could just go back to that bear who changed your life, and tell us a little bit about how you started doing what you do.
Wow. Well, she did, as I said, she changed everything about my life. It was during a tourist trip with Japanese and Taiwanese tourists all those years ago in 1993 that I walked onto a bear farm and into my own living hell. And, you know, I'd broken away from the tour group. I'd found this awful basement full of 32 caged moon bears. And as I was walking around in shock, I obviously had backed too close to a cage and felt something touch my shoulder. And as I turned around, there was her paw through the bar of the cage, and it was such a ridiculously stupid thing on my part to do, but it was there, and I took her paw. And it's just something you wouldn't do today to a caged bear. They are so unpredictable and so potentially, you know, violent because they're so, you know, they're suffering so badly. But her paw was there. I took it, and she squeezed my fingers. And I always say to kids, you know, in presentations that, you know, you receive messages in your life that you can choose to listen to or ignore. And her message was too profound to ignore. And I left that farm, I think, really knowing that I would never see her again. And I didn't. We weren't able to save her. But I gave her a name, Hong, which means bear in Cantonese. And I just left with a promise that we would do everything in our power to end the plight that had put her in a cage. And that's what brought us to the present day.
So to do this kind of work, which I think as you start to explain to people what you do and how you do it, I think we can say quite simply that you were touched by an angel, and there was a message, a very clear message as to what you needed to do, the why you needed to do it.
It was, you can't unsee anything. You walk away from something like that, and I think in your heart you know that your path is going to be very different in the future, and indeed it was. I can't even articulate it really. It's just something that had to be, and you know, and today I'm just so proud that we're at the position we are and able to actually rescue these bears and actually be rescued by them.
That's an interesting point. Exactly, be rescued by them.
Yeah.
So let me just give you a little leeway here to just go into your presentation, and then every once in a while I'll come up with a question that I know I've heard people ask, and I think if we had a live audience, you'd be getting from them. So tell us about what you did after that, after you had that one moment. Then what? In terms of the work.
Okay, well, after that one moment, I think again, it was very clear that we needed to start a foundation that would see freedom for as many of these animals as possible, but also, freedom for bear farming to finally end, so that no bears would be caged into the future. And that's, I think, why I'm putting this in 2017, because I think this has been a rather pivotal year for us. In the foundation, we're seeing so many examples of freedom now, and I will just keep to bears today. But obviously, I think many of your listeners will know that we also work in the cat and dog industry in Asia, captive animals industry in zoos and safari parks, and we are seeing such wonderful progress. But this is bears, and this is freedom for bears to turn somersaults as they do in busy dances of play. I mean, they are the most incredible species, the most incredible forgiving animal that can really come around from their suffering, put their misery behind, and then be out in enclosures playing like this with their friends. We're seeing freedoms for bears like Shima, and this is a bear I know very close to your heart, Theo, because this is a really funny picture, because it makes me think she's almost, I don't know, she's sitting in her chair there, like a deck chair at a seaside resort, calling over to the waiter for a cheeky little pina colada or something. And this is what makes me laugh about bears, because they are so charismatic. You can be quite anthropomorphic about them. You can put your emotions into theirs, because clearly she's making a gesture there. I don't know what that is, and I've probably got her completely wrong, but that's what she's doing. And I think, again, your audience might like to know that she has been named after your beloved dog from so many years ago. And they are very dog-like. They belong to the same suborder of carnivores, both dogs and bears. And it couldn't be more appropriate that you called a bear Shima.
And Shima means island, and she came with the name, but I remember I used to always call her my little bear, and that was a good 20 years ago. So wow. We've come full circle, and thank you for the honor of the new Shima.
No, thank you for the honor of her name. She suits it beautifully. So freedom again making us laugh, to contemplate their navels anytime that they would like. And freedom, I think, for all of us to dare to dream that one day there won't ever be the need for sanctuaries, because these bears are able to live their lives, be born into their lives in the wild, as they have every right to do, and not see sanctuaries, not have to come to sanctuaries. As much as we love having them, they shouldn't be there. They should be in the countries of their birth, and that's what I find so disturbing about bear bar farming, because it destroys that future, and it removes that right to be in the wild. So until that date, that is Animals Asia's mission, if you like, to provide freedom for as many bears that are incarcerated in cages in China and in Vietnam. So in China, where bears like Willow have been caged for anything up to 30 years of their life, and 10,000 of them today.
So quite literally, that is an example of the kind of cage that they live in.
Absolutely. This is what we call a crushed cage, because it literally crushes them to the bars, so that they are in an area, a surface area so small that they can hardly move, let alone turn around. And that is their life in cages that will ultimately become their coffins. In Vietnam, the same, about 1,000 bears there, where the industry is now, thank heavens, illegal. And I think that's the point of again, one of our sort of banners, if you like, of freedom, because now we are really seeing freedom for bears in Vietnam, where we signed a declaration, an agreement with the Vietnam government in a press conference in July of this year, where they invited Animals Asia to join them in the announcement to say that bear bar farming will be done by the year 2022. Now, there are other NGOs that are working in Vietnam, and I think Animals Asia is very blessed that we were the first group there in the late 1990s. And that's why we were invited by the government to join them in that declaration. But of course, in the months and years ahead, we all need to collaborate with other NGOs now to make that declaration a promise, so that in the next 5 years it's done. Bear farming has come to an end.
And that is an incredible victory, an incredible step for the end to it worldwide, China, anywhere else. And also for the NEAVS listeners out there, which I'm sure a great percent of our supporters are from our own family. I want you to know that over the years, NEAVS has helped fund the work of Animal Asia's to the tune of some $600,000. And we fund projects like this because, first of all, we vet the individual in charge, we vet the organization, and because it's something that we see as part of our mission, but outside of our reach to do. And so I hope every NEAVS supporter out there who will also become an Animals Asia supporter appreciates that your gift is what allows this kind of thing to happen. So just keep that in mind as you listen to the amazing work that Jill and her team have been able to accomplish, that we're a small part of it.
Oh goodness, it's much more than that. I mean, 600,000 US is no small amount, and it's literally been a lifeblood in our work, and I think as well what people should recognize is that, this has been a very challenging year for us this year, and NEAVS really did rescue us in our hour of need. So really, from all of us in the Animals Asia family, we want to thank you so gratefully, because we were so horribly worried, and you allowed us, you gave us that peace of mind to be able to continue in our work.
How lovely to rescue the bear rescuers. Delightful.
So, well, you were talking about the, vivisection and the egregious use of animals, and especially when there are alternatives. And of course, in traditional Chinese medicine and traditional Vietnamese medicine, there are alternatives. Now, we know that bear bile works. We know that, from working even with Minnesota University here in the United States, that it contains a very essential acid called ursodeoxycholic acid, or UDCA, which is used to break down gallstones, to help with chronic liver complaints, other areas as well. But again, no one is going to die for the lack of bear bile. And in Vietnam especially, what we're finding is that the association there for traditional medicine are also now very much against the practice, because they recognize that it is not in harmony with traditional medicine as their whole remit dictates. So 60,000 of their members have agreed to stop using bear bile and stop prescribing bear bile by the year 2020. So that in itself, again, is another really big hurdle that we've been able to negotiate with them, and then goes hand in hand with our partnership with the Vietnamese government to end the practice finally.
Is part of that based on the fact that there are alternatives to it that have similar or better or...
Yeah, good point. In China, there's 54 different herbal alternatives, and in Vietnam, there's 32 herbal alternatives as well. So again, they're abundantly available. They're widely prescribed by the doctors themselves. And again, as they say, it's not doing harm to bears. As again, the whole essence of traditional medicine dictates, do no harm. Yeah.
And so this too is again an example of some of the work we do, which is that science itself is going to end the use of animals in research. Right. And here too, the scientific reality of what those herbal remedies can provide make this egregious use totally unnecessary. Totally unnecessary.
Totally. And in addition, there's a synthetic alternative as well that has been used for decades, and it's made in a laboratory without the use of bear bile, and it's again sold by the ton across the world. So both with synthetics and with herbs, again, the bears are entirely unnecessarily held in these cages and suffering as they do, and as you'll see as this presentation moves on, surgically mutilated too. And I at this point, I would really like to keep our audience together. You will see pictures that make you feel uncomfortable, but as we always say, stay with us, because we hope that you will leave this presentation able to articulate why it's so important to join with Animals Asia and with NEAVS to help us end bear bile farming. So the herbal alternatives, one of the things that's very important, apart from working with the traditional medicine doctors themselves, is working in communities who perhaps do buy this product as well, and having the doctors themselves emphasize to those communities that it can be replaced. So we have workshops where the community comes together with the doctors. We're then able to prescribe samples of the herbal alternatives that the doctors then can emphasize to the potential consumers that it does the job just as well, if not better. And it certainly doesn't contain the bacterial contaminants that bear bile contains from the bodies of such diseased bears as well. So it's really important to get the buy-in, not just of the traditional medicine doctors, but the local community too.
And you don't know this yet, though I've hinted at it. And for those of you who will be at the event tomorrow evening, the American Fund for Alternatives to Animal Research, of which I am the trustee, will be giving you a $50,000 grant specifically to bolster and continue to work on this program of alternative education, use, and as part of the end.
Wow. Well, I mean, goodness, Theo, that sort of help is absolutely invaluable to this, because it's one of the pioneering projects that we could be moving forwards in Vietnam, because obviously it's, you know, if it's demand based, then we need to move forward very aggressively on demand reduction, and that's one way of doing that. And again, with NEAVS help, we're able to fulfill that promise to the Vietnamese government to end it and bring an end to the prescription of bear bile as well. So bless your hearts for doing that too. Thank you. So of course, it's not just again working in the villages and encouraging the consumers, but it's again working with doctors in Vietnam to encourage them to grow more of these herbal alternatives. And that's exactly what our team are doing in the south, in the north, and in central Vietnam, on the ground, planting the seedlings, getting those herbs out there into the community, and really giving the doctors face as well. It's very, very important that we're not disparaging traditional medicine, but we are saying, you know, collaboratively with them, there are alternatives, and they are very proud to work with an NGO as well, so that we can make that point together.
And an NGO, by the way, is a non-government organization, just so those of you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Obviously, we have to work within the remit of the law as well. And again, in Vietnam, is holding workshops with the Vietnamese government, where the bear bile farmers themselves are invited along, so that the government can talk to them about the fact that obviously it is illegal, and so that the farmers can't plead ignorance of the law as well. So, you know, that's difficult, because the farmers have obviously been, you know, gaining financially, but they've been put on notice for quite a few years now, where bear farming has been illegal in the country. Now they are on notice. It is going to end by the year 2022. So you have to now start moving out of this industry, and workshops like this help them to do that. Working in the local community, where, you know, these kids, for example, their parents are bear bile farmers. This is a bear farming province, if you like, where there's about 196 bears on 30 farms, I think, in this area in Phun Thong. And where, you know, we invite the school children to do things like having a drawing competition. And it was really, what I found very touching about this project was that we asked them to draw their perception of bears, and nearly every single kid drew bears in the wild, even though after school they would go home to their parents who had bears in cages. So, you know, this to us was quite grounding, if you like. You know, it was a very touching project to do, and again, you can see that, you know, I mean, they're winning prizes, and they're obviously going back to their parents, because they're putting two and two together and realizing that those bears aren't, you know, having a happy life out in enclosures, etc. We're also working with the Buddhist community. Every time they have an event, they allow us to go along and put up our banner ads in that same area of Phun Thong, where there's obviously a very strong religious component there with the local community as well. So it's just working very sensibly within the community, not pointing fingers, not being aggressive, but just working within, you know, areas that move us forward culturally and sensitively.
Brilliant.
Of course, it's continuing the development of our sanctuaries in China and Vietnam as well. And this is in Vietnam, where our promise to the government is that we would build a facility that would house a total of 200 bears. And this was the opening of our double bear house earlier this year, house 9 and 10, the last houses that fulfill that promise. And as you can see, we've already rescued now 186 bears in Vietnam, with 170 alive. And this is the house 9 and 10, with them completely, lazing around, and obviously.
Can I ask a question just about this one? Having lived such solitary lives, do they form groups easily, or is it a skill like it is with chimps, where sometimes you have to do a whole socialization?
That's a really good question. You have to completely start from the beginning and start socializing them one-on-one individually. So put them into a den, next to each other, where they can sniff and smell and see each other and hear each other. If they start to slap each other, that might not be a good mix. If they start to pat each other gently, you may have a match made in heaven. It's very much trial and error. Because, as you say, Theo, quite rightly, they're not a social species in the wild, or generally not. But oh my goodness, once you get it right, you can see here you've got lifelong friendships, really for decades again.
And I slap people I don't like to. So there you go.
So do I. And you can see they get more than used to these places, because they then start to destroy them. So, a big part of your funding is actually repair it. Now, that's a joke, but
well, probably not. Probably not. It's okay. It's reality. Whatever they need, right?
Exactly. They are relentless in their destruction. This is something we call a tree party. And, some of our trees are there to be protected. You can see some of them have hot wires or electric fencing around. They learn to, destroy that electric fencing, to climb up, rip all that browse from the trees, toss it down to their friends below. And what can we do? We just go on the walkie-talkie, we say it's a tree party, and everyone goes and watches the fun, because we can't stop them at all doing that. So
because they call it fun, not destruction.
Right. Right. I always say, think 10-year-old children. Their mission is to destroy the whole enclosure if they can, and boy, they give it a pretty good go. And I think this introduces us as well to that contrast as well, in a case study here of a beautiful bear called Kay that we rescued a couple of years ago, when I think it was 9 bears on a bear farm, and my heart just was won and broken by this one bear. Every bear is individual, every bear is so special, and every bear is named. And when we first saw her, we were absolutely blown away by how much she had obviously suffered on the bear farm. She was missing a lot of her fur, so clearly her immune system had completely crashed. Her eyes were a big problem, because the eyelids had turned in and the eyelashes were scratching, her eyes, and obviously causing a great deal of irritation. And they were obviously watering, and she couldn't blink up to the light properly. She obviously had arthritis at that time, and frankly, bless her little heart, she smelt a lot. I mean, she was giving off a very pungent odor. And you know what, the sweetest thing about this bear is that when she stood up like this, it just made me cry, because you can see the vulnerability about her, those little nipples sticking out from her chest. And the one thing that is missing on that chest is the blaze of yellow, the lemony crescent that gives them the name of moon bears in the wild. And that's completely been taken away from her as a result of the bear farming industry. But what we saw as we were doing the rescue is that she would go from side to side on this bear bile farm to the bears either side of this caged area, as if she was giving them comfort. It's quite difficult to explain, but she was just the sweetest, gentlest bear, and she would put her paws through and they would be looking through to her, and she was just almost communicating with them as if she was saying it's going to be okay. And it was okay, because after we rescued them, after we started to provide all the veterinary care that they needed, and she started to feel better and we began to integrate them, then she began to make friendships with 2 key bears, with Gloria and Autumn, that you can see in the den area. And when this starts happening, it's the most profoundly touching thing I think we can ever see. Every day you see progress as they start to play gently together, or they start sharing these hanging basket beds, which they absolutely love. You can see her in the front, her little bald tummy, the fur still growing through. And in fact, Autumn behind, who's also got a bald tummy, but that's because she's had a health check and had that shaved for the ultrasound. But you can see the confidence of these bears growing. You can see that Kay is beginning to learn to play. She's got that ridiculous tire around her bald body, you know, that she's just beginning to figure out that, you know, is a bit of fun. And again, think back, 10-year-old children, if you can play with 10-year-old children and figure out how to look after them, you're halfway to looking after bears. Because at the end of the day, you know, it's just that sense of trust, I think, and how they move forwards in beginning to have the confidence to explore their enclosures, as Kay was starting to do there. You can see the fur beginning to grow back. You can see her becoming more curious, that sense of mischief, that sense of play, as she's going out and investigating her platforms and her enclosure furniture as well. And then suddenly, you know, the ultimate for us all when we saw her like this, just lying on her back, completely confident, and that beautiful crescent moon just beginning to come through. It's not quite a blaze yet, but it's beginning to show, and you can see there she's now finally got the name for which she was born, of Moon Bear.
It's a beautiful, beautiful metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah.
The crescent moon.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
And just that face, and I will say she's smiling there, and I'll talk about that in a little while. But you know, pictures like that just fill your heart, and pictures like this break your heart as well. And this is why we do what we do, because again, remember, there are thousands and thousands of bears in China and in Vietnam that so desperately need our help. And caging bears like that is an absolute crime when you think of how they behave in the wild and how they are given an arsenal of senses and emotions, as we have an arsenal of senses and emotions as well. You know, they are born to have sight and sound and taste and touch and smell, and a sense of choice and forgiveness and everything that we experience. Their hearing and their sound is so fundamentally important to bears as it is to us, and especially when bears are blind, like our beautiful Wilfred, or Watermelon, that was his nickname when we first rescued him. And the reason that Wilfred is blind is because of what they suffer on these bear farms. So their ocular disease stems from either banging their heads against the bars of the cage and dislocating their lens, for example, or if their nutrition on the farms is absolutely hideous. And they are given food that lacks any sort of vitamin, especially vitamin E, which then again compromises their sight. Or they have infection from the awful method of bile extraction or surgical mutilation, the disease that travels around their body and eventually into their eyes and ultimately blinds them. And so for a bear like Wilfred, again, his sense of hearing is so important as he navigates his way, and his sense of smell as he's navigating his way around the enclosure. So he can navigate log piles. He can navigate electric fencing. We feel he can hear or sense the pulses of the electric fence before he goes into it. We even know that he can navigate his way to girlfriends. And again, I'm not using that loosely. He has a girlfriend called Bile, and they mate around this time every year, you know, from spring to the summer, every single year. And you know, clearly he's doing what comes naturally. She's enjoying it too. And these are two completely blind bears. So, you know, we can help them through their disabilities and hopefully do as much as we can to help them behave as normally as they can at our sanctuaries.
So are the males vasectomized or the females? So you don't have to worry about babies growing up.
Right, that's a really good question, Theo, thank you. Yeah, the boys are all castrated. Obviously it helps in management because it reduces their hormonal level, but of course the main thing is that, you know, we love cubs, but that would be very selfish to encourage breeding, because our facility has to help as many caged bears as possible in both countries. And you know, we keep the females intact, so there's a viable population of females should the population ever demise. So yeah, and remember again, they are an Appendix 1 endangered species. So that was a really good point to make. We have females that we can produce from if we had to, but at the moment we certainly don't. Their sense of taste, like us. They are food obsessed, like us, like I certainly am. I don't know about you, Leo. We were munching away on vegan sushi this morning, and what did I have? A vegan Caesar salad this morning for breakfast. Thinking of what your next meal is, and bears are no different. And so our facilities cater for that sense of taste. Their enrichment program is rotated every single day to provide a novel enrichment, to that sense of taste. And for bears like Sunshine, as he's crunching down on that carrot, it's wonderful. But for other bears, and he's got a full set of teeth, but for other bears, I'm afraid they have very badly compromised teeth, and far from having a healthy set of incisors, canines, and molars, as the bear on the left of the picture has got. Very often the bears have their teeth cut deliberately back to gum level to take away their defences and make them less dangerous to milk of their bile on the bear bar farms, or because they are repetitively biting the bars of the cage, they're shattering their own teeth and sometimes their jaws as well.
And Jill, that was an intubation tube, just so people know what they're looking at.
I'm sorry, yeah, that was under.
And how did he get to save his teeth? Was he rescued young, or?
This one on the
Sunshine,
left,
yeah.
The one on the left is just that, they've come in as youngsters, as very young bears, that have actually not been in a cage for very long. So the longer they're in a cage, obviously, the more that they're bar biting,
and like the blindness, a not uncommon problem.
90% of our bears need dental work, over 90%, because their teeth have been so badly damaged on these bear bar farms. So the bear in the middle, for example, will have had all of those teeth removed, because there's nothing we can obviously do to help those. But you'd be amazed, and this is the picture that proves it, how they can get by. Anyone that's got a dog or a cat that's had most of the teeth removed, how they can survive very, very well. Bears are no different. Their gums harden up. They still remain greedy animals. And Prince on the left there, he's hardly got a tooth left in his head, but Freedom on the right is giving him a cheeky little kiss, to her gummy bear, as we call him. So, so no impediment. He's a big buff of a bear. Look at him. He loves his food, and he is huge. So, he's getting by, especially without teeth that he was born with. So there's no problem there. The sense of touch, again, like us, of course, so important. And this is Ozzy. We call him the wuss because he's got a W-shaped crescent rather than a moon-shaped crescent on his chest. And because he is, after being with us since about 2000, for about 17 years, he still runs back to his den for comfort if there's something that, sees him a little bit skittish or uncertain. But when he's out there like that, toe holding, that you've got a very comfortable bear, a bear that really feels safe and secure out in the enclosure. But again, toe holding is important. That touch, that sense of touch, superbly important. And how does that convert on the bear bile farms when they have the ends of their paw tips deliberately cut back to stop those claws from growing, again to stop them being less dangerous to milk? How does that convert when their claws, if they haven't been declawed, are still growing over and puncturing their pads because they keep growing, they don't just stop? And the smell of that diseased pad when they come in is just horrible, and how painful must that be as well? So how is their sense of touch compromised when they're missing limbs from being caught in leg hold traps, as Vandrew on the left of the picture here is missing his whole right limb, there, his front right limb, or Freedom, that missing both her front paws from being caught in a double leg hold trap as well. So again, our sanctuaries are geared to have substrates and straw and grass and lots of novel things for them to be able to touch and experience as they would in the wild, and just get them used to it, get them past that caution that they've always had in cages, and get them completely.
And I've seen bear traps as used in the United States, and they're a pretty formidable, terrifying middle-aged device which could rip a child in half.
Oh.
So what some of these bears have gone through, even before their horrors began, was horrific. The other thing I just want to point out is when you talk to us about the paw mutilation and the dental mutilation. I mean, none of this is done with any consideration at all of actually extracting teeth on anesthesia. It looks like it's all done the easiest way for
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, in the wild, of course, they will just trap them, and there will be no surgery to repair those awful wounds that you can see there when they're having their teeth removed or cut back, or their claws cut back. Of course, there's anaesthetic because they wouldn't be able to do it. But the anaesthetic is so archaic. It's so medieval. It's inappropriate use of the anaesthetic, and of course, there's no painkillers as well. So they would use maybe antibiotics just to keep these bears alive. But again, they're used in inappropriate dosages. And amounts, and there is nothing, to look at any sort of medical consequence of trying to help those bears. It's all about how the farmers can save money, do this in the cheapest way possible to keep those bears alive, so they keep giving bile. That was a really good question, Theo. Thank you. Their sense of smell, of course, probably one of the most important senses with Taurus. They're very deliberately smelling his rose, and how is that sense of smell compromised again on the bear bile farms when they are lying together in cages next to other bears that are literally at death's door because of disease, and they themselves are dying slowly over the months or the years as they're compromised for their bile. So the reason that they're dying is that mutilation. And again, I apologize to you guys listening to this, but bear with me, because this is the reality of bear bile farming, where metal catheters have been used, latex catheters have been used. In the case of the top left-hand picture, this is the free drip method of bile extraction that sees the gallbladder, the organ in green, taken away from its natural place by the gallbladder and adhesed unnaturally to the abdominal wall, and a hole or a fistula created so that the bile starts to flow out. And this is the ultimate result. This is the free drip method that is sanctioned under regulations in China, but of course, sees the end result here of the bears, where they are obviously a perfect vector for bacterial infection. And ultimately, not surprisingly, it causes a ripple effect and sees liver cancer, for example, in about 40% of our bears. So while they go on to live a happy life at our sanctuary for many, many years, we've been open in China, for example, since 2000, when they die, ultimately 40% of them or more will die as a result of liver cancer. And again, as a direct result of the bear bile farming industry. But I want to say as well that, it's almost impossible to believe that they can have a happy life. And that's what I want to reassure your listeners, that they do. And again, because of NEAVS' kindness, this is the only reason that we can go on. And this is, I think, it has to be the goal of all of us to allow bears like Kevin to smile. And if any of your listeners are thinking that I'm being anthropomorphic saying that, then I would say shame. Because any of you that has dogs, I think you will see your dogs very often smile. And we've worked for many, many years with the most amazing woman here in the US who headed up the bear care group, Elsa Paulson. She was a bear keeper. She's written a multitude of books, including one called Smiling Bears. And she made it very, very clear that scientifically, but bears are turning up their mouths as dogs turn up their mouths when they're happy, in that remarkable gesture of a smile. And we see that time and time again with bears like Kevin, with bears like Francie, turning up the corners of her mouth when she is peaceful, when she is happy, when they're playing, like Oliver. Just before he trashed his whole den. That was his first release into a den, where he completely wrecked the whole thing, obviously having a great time. Ginny looking there like, a gummy bear again, hardly any teeth, but once again, deliberately smiling, and Foxy, and no greater example there. And again, Yoshima, just there. I mean, what is that picture? That's 1,000 words. She's not only smiling, but she's turning somersaults. I mean, she's being very provocative there with young Taurus as well. So when you were asking about the mating, well, yeah, I think Taurus might have been taking his chances just after that picture was taken as well. But again, I love pictures like that because it shows that wonderful sense of joy and belonging that they have in our sanctuaries as well.
And getting to be bears again.
Right.
It's so simple.
Yeah, for the first time in their lives.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just really quickly, just on some of the strategy as well. I've talked a lot about our program in Vietnam, but in China too, of course, we have a strategy, and our government relations are extremely important in a country where bear biofarming is still legal. So we need to work with the government very collaboratively on programs that protect bears in the wild. And just show a responsible attitude, against the challenges that we face in the bear biofarming industry. So we have a fantastic education centre where we invite, the Chinese government to have summer camps, to invite celebrities along. We were actually given an award by the government earlier this year, which made us very proud to be working in collaboration with the government. We work with Chinese biologists, for example, as well, on human-bear conflicts. So in areas where bears are migrating into human habitats and potentially causing problems there. So funding programs that talk about solutions and how to protect the local population there from bear encroachment, etc., etc. So just really try to work again on programs that help people as well. So this is another example of impoverished children being invited every year in a summer camp just to come along and be bear keepers for the day, to work with our bear team in China to enrich the enclosures, to be a bear keeper for a day, and then just see the bears come tumbling out of their dens and enjoying the fruits of these kids' labours as well. And that with them understanding the reality of bear biofarming and being another voice, if you like, in support of our work to protect bears in general in China as well. So it is obviously a sensitive program, but the fact is that if we weren't working collaboratively with the government, then we're not going to be involved with them in the future as we are in Vietnam. We have to have good relations, and one of the reasons we know we have good relations is when we're called upon to join them in rescues like this. And this was a rescue of a bear called Rainbow in the wild, who was caught illegally in a leg hold trap. The Chinese government asked us to help. We went up into the hills of Pengzhou, just outside of our sanctuary, where we found a yearling that had been caught in a snare. She'd obviously been trapped for several days. She was very badly dehydrated. And her paw was an absolute disgrace. By the time we got to her, it was badly necrotic and rotten. It was fly blown and maggots all over it. There were maggots in her face, crawling up her nose, into her eyes. Her teeth had been cracked because she was trying to bite the metal snare away as well. And by the time we got her back to the surgery and we shaved up her arm under anaesthetic, we realised there was nothing that we could do for that necrotic, rotting paw. And so our vets had to amputate, and they did, again, the most sterling job. They made sort of a cushion, if you like. They moved the bone high, they cut the bone high, the tissue and the muscle low. So they made sort of a cushion at the end of that paw so that she could weight bear. And then as she was recovering, we got in touch with Chinese biologists, with biologists here in the United States, the IUCN Bear Specialist Group, and to a person, they all said, let her go back to the wild. She was a yearling. She'd obviously survived well in the wild. Her mother may or may not have been still there. They had done a sweep of the area. They had assured us that there were no traps left in the area. So, it was, we knew that there was a viable food supply out there as well. So it just seemed everything was right to actually release her back into the wild. And that's exactly what we did. And I just hope that her lips are bright blue from eating as many blueberries as she could eat. And you know, that it was such a nice program together with the Chinese government that we hope to be invited to do more like that when the opportunity arises as well. So finally, in the last few minutes of this, again, it's always important to work with celebrities, especially in China and in Vietnam. You know, celebrity is such a big part of our work and of the Chinese community. They love their celebs like Xu Weizhou, who, when he came and visited us on site in Chengdu, in Sichuan province, he saw 5.5 million supporters coming onto the Weibo, the social networks, in support of his visit. And he obviously goes away with a very strong message of protecting black bears in China. And people know what that means. And people know when Karen Mock, you know, your listeners might not know who she is. She is called the Madonna of Asia. She is so hugely popular. And together with another 14 celebrities, they've got 127 million followers in the country of China. So it's a really strong foothold that the celebs have internationally as well. Oh my goodness, we work with the real deal. And I think a lot of your listeners will know these two guys. Of course, the legendary Alan McGraw from Love Story, who is just the most beautiful actress and woman, and Leslie Nichol from Downton Abbey, who plays Mrs. Patmore. Great friends, the two of them, great friends of mine, and again, perfect ambassadors and help us as much as they can. The school visits, of course, the public education that we said before in Vietnam, equally important in China, to just really engage the local population, the local kids, the university students as well, just to keep coming back time and time again, as they do in their thousands, to the sanctuary. The volunteer programs that we have as well, please go onto the website, have a look at those. You can apply for a week-long volunteer program to come and be bear keepers and bear managers for the day. We've booked up, I think, even into next year, but they are just fantastically successful, and you really, you know, just get to be part and parcel of the program that we do. The sanctuaries themselves just speak volumes, where over 600 bears have been rescued. These two bears look like bookends. They really are two different bears, but they just show our duty of care to these animals from, you know, when we receive many of them, as we do teeny tiny cubs, through to their adult life and into their 30-year lifespan as well. And that's once again why the help of NEAVS is so important. The health checks that we have, that you have actually funded now for us for the next year, every 2 years, we have to understand what is going on in their bodies. Remember again, because they may be, you know, starting the beginnings of cancer that we know is our mortal enemy as well. We have to medicate the bears, many of them, with those 27,000 fruit shakes and 40,000 marshmallows in China alone. It's just, you know, it just goes on and on. Their management in the dens, we keep the dens open, and I don't know, you know, the shelters that you know, Theo, this is one of my big bugbears when you go to zoos and they shut those den doors. So they keep the bears open to the public. They keep them on display outside. Our bears have the choice whether to stay outside or whether to come in. If you come to our sanctuaries and you don't see a lot of bears in the enclosures, I'm sorry, but that's tough, because we have given these bears the one thing they never had on the farms, the choice of how to lead their lives.
That's right. And, you know, we've seen chimpanzees rescued from zoos who in the beginning in sanctuary would want to get outside, but would sit there in order to make sure that they couldn't close the door on them, right, and keep them outside or inside until they learned, oh, it's a different world, and there is that one thing, some choice.
Yeah,
some choice.
Exactly. It's really important, and it's important to engage the staff in that final decision. You know, again, I'm not sure, you know, a lot of zoos, and I am talking predominantly in Asia. That's where I live and work. But, you know, not to give the staff that input, that respect of making that decision. When the time has come to euthanize a bear, to have our bear workers, our Chinese, Vietnam bear workers that know those bears so well, to have them in that same veterinary surgery, talking with our vet team, with our bear managers, with myself, so that when that decision is made, you are all completely comfortable, you all have closure that the time has come to put that bear to sleep, because and that's the right decision, and it's the right decision to say goodbye respectfully in that enclosure, to bury them with their favorite food, their favorite toys, read them the poem, again have that closure of our staff being able to walk away and say they did right by those bears, because again of the help of people like you, because of NEAVS. And you know, I just have nothing to add except to say our profound gratitude to you, because you keep us keeping on, and there's no greater thanks than seeing that example of thanks from bears like Shima.
It's difficult to know what to say at this point, because the presentation really kind of said it all, didn't it? We started out with why, and presentation was all about what you do. And I want to say one thing, which is, you know, part of my respect for you, Jill, knowing a lot about the abuse and sanctuary community, is that Animal Asia is doing the full width. You're not just rescuing bears, you're working to end it. You're not just working to end it, you're actually putting in the time and resources, an enormous amount of love and energy it takes to keep them in sanctuary for the rest of their lives. And so because of that, I think the expression is bandwidth of who you are and what you do. It is why I think Animals Asia and you yourself as the founder and leader deserve that place of really special regard, which it seems like so many of my esteemed colleagues and the world has for you. So I want to thank you. I have some other questions, but I think you've actually answered them all. And so I think we can wrap up with just a couple of pieces of information for our listeners, which is, don't forget, if you're local to Boston, and I mean within an hour and a half drive, because that's how long it takes me even just from Georgetown to get in, it'll be well worth it if you can be with us tomorrow night in Newburyport at the Firehouse, because you'll get to meet Jill up close and personal. And it's always, always an honor to be in the actual company of this kind of spirit and this kind of human being, which the world needs more of. So join us tomorrow night if you can. If you cannot, keep visiting our website, keep visiting Animal Asia's website, and keep thanking the world for people like Jill and groups like NEAVS and Animals Asia.